In the early 1950s, when Brooklyn historian Ron Schweiger was a little boy, his father took him to a Brooklyn Dodgers game at Ebbets Field. It was his first in person experience. Schweiger was a huge Dodgers fan. He was so excited, so ready to cheer for his team. But when he walked into the stadium, he was stunned. According to Schweiger, quote, "When we got to the top of the ramp and I caught my first glimpse of the field, I stopped short." End quote. Schweiger's father, seeing his son's shocked expression, asked him, "What's wrong? What's the matter?" To which Schweiger replied, quote, "The grass is green." End quote. Schweiger was shocked because he'd only ever seen Dodgers games on television, in black and white. So his little boy brain imagined the grass, the field, the players as black and white. Isn't that fantastic? I mean, of course, Ron Schweiger would have known actual green grass from his day-to-day life. Some part of him would have known that the players on the screen were in fact living people in color. And yet it was also his reality that his team, his heroes, existed solely in black and white. And I wonder, for decades, how many other kids faced the smack of reality when they visited a major league ballpark for the first time. The obvious but astounding fact that the game was actually in color. But even without the full spectrum of colors, Ron Schweiger, watching his black and white screen at home, would have noticed something different about one of the players on his favorite team. One of the best players on his favorite team. He would have noticed the man's skin. It was much darker than the skin of every other player on the field. Or maybe he wouldn't have noticed. Maybe the experience for Schweiger was similar to that of Jerry Reinsdorf, owner of the Chicago Bulls and Chicago White Sox, who grew up in Brooklyn in the 40s and 50s during the debut of Jackie Robinson. From Reinsdorf, quote, "I was 11 years old. What did I know about social issues? The fact of the matter is all I cared about was if he was going to be any good." End quote. Reinsdorf continued, quote, "The first time it dawned on me that something more was happening was when I asked my friend, Lester Davis, who was African American, who his favorite player was. He looked at me like I was an idiot and said, 'Jackie Robinson, of course.' And I said, 'Oh yeah, that's right.'" End quote. To Reinsdorf, Jackie Robinson wasn't the best player he'd ever seen, but he was the most exciting. The way he stole second and third and even home. The way he took big risks on the base paths that usually paid off. The way he toyed with pitchers and catchers. According to Reinsdorf, Robinson was incredible to watch in a rundown. And tens of thousands of children probably shared Reinsdorf's and Schweiger's opinions. That it didn't matter what color skin he had, as long as he was good. As long as he helped his team win. But these kids, like Reinsdorf and Schweiger, wouldn't have understood the stakes, the profound implications of a man stepping onto a Major League Baseball field in a Major League uniform that covered a darker shade of skin. Martin Luther King Jr. understood. King said he couldn't have done what he did without Jackie Robinson. King claimed that it would have been years before MLB introduced another African American player if Robinson had failed. People would have said, black players aren't good enough. Just look at that Robinson. And that would have been enough to jam things up for years, maybe even a decade. Especially if, in addition to mediocre play, Robinson had been hot-headed, confrontational, and loud. People would have said, look at how black players act. They can't be trusted. They're not mature. This is what people would have said, even though dozens, if not hundreds of white major league players over the years were hot-headed, confrontational, and loud. Jackie Robinson existed on a knife's edge. But whether he was dancing on the base paths or struggling to suppress his rage over the unjust treatment from players and fans, he certainly made the game entertaining for a new breed of spectator, the television audience. Tonight, I dive into a part of Jackie Robinson's story that almost no one talks about, the role of television. Robinson became America's first bona fide TV-era sports star, broadcast into homes before most Americans even owned a set. Television amplified his message, his poise, his courage. But it also magnified the pressure, the scrutiny, and the weight he carried alone. And it may have played a genuine role in ending his life at the age of 53. From historic milestones
That did it! Holy cow! A strikeout gets his 300th career win, and I tell you, this is...
to euphoric moments shared by millions.
In a year that has been so improbable, the impossible has happened.
To the simple banter that brought us together.
It's foul. Malachi with the call. I love that name.
It's a good name.
When you and I have a child together, we should name him Malachi.
Welcome to the Midnight Library of Baseball, Season 4, the broadcast that raised us, from radio to television and beyond. I'm Ben Orlando. For someone who didn't live through the 1940s, me, certain years stand out because of the historical record. 1941, Pearl Harbor. 1944, Kennesaw Mountain Landis died. 1945 and 46, the ends of the different parts of World War II. But 1947? Well, it was actually a pretty big year. So America is starting to transition away from World War II, moving toward prosperity. And this is the same time that Jackie Robinson was stepping into the major leagues. And something else was happening here, the rise of television. Now, by 1947, there were only a few thousand television sets in the entire country. Compare that with millions and millions of radios. But serious shows like Meet the Press were gaining an audience. And then you had this kind of strange kids' puppet show. It was called Puppet Television Theater, and it introduced a new character, Howdy Doody. I don't know. When I look at photos of this puppet, it kind of creeps me out. But kids loved him, and these new programs created demand. Just like that, television began to matter. And this same year, 1947, saw the first televised World Series between the Dodgers and Yankees. Now, this first televised World Series was awful by any standard. Sunlight and shadow made players disappear into pockets of darkness or white, blinding light. But people watched anyway. 4 million people huddled around screens across the East Coast. I mean, one question you might have is why the reception was so bad, but it's because this was a new thing. And I'm trying to think of a parallel today. Maybe imagine there's a wireless feed from an astronaut who's landed on Mars. And we have the opportunity to go online, to go on our phones, and see what they see. But the reception is terrible. Would we care? No, because we've never seen Mars. It was never even a concept, a possibility to see Mars. So, am I going to stare at snowy, grainy, barely discernible images? Yeah, I am. And this would have been the case for millions of people watching a ball game on television for the first time. From historian Zach Petrillo, quote, "Over the next 3 years, television owners exploded to approximately 6 million homes. And as more sets entered the living rooms of average Americans, so too did Robinson. End quote. That's crazy. A few thousand sets turns into 6 million in 3 years. And that number would grow to 10 million in 3 more years. That's a giant wave that Jackie Robinson was riding from the start. This story isn't just about athletic talent. It's about a man who arrived at the precise moment when technology, culture, and a post-war nation were suddenly capable of confronting a truth they'd avoided for decades. Now, I said capable, not motivated, not excited, not happy. They were capable of change under the right circumstances. To understand how Robinson became Robinson, how he endured what he endured, and why it mattered in the exact way it did, we have to go back to the man who orchestrated the entire experiment, Branch Rickey, the Dodgers general manager. Branch Rickey is why this is such an amazing story. Because if you remove Branch Rickey from the picture, it doesn't matter how strong, how good Jackie Robinson was. He's not going to make it to the majors. At least not in 1947. And probably not in 1948, 49, 50. And then you wouldn't have the entrance of other African American stars. Willie Mays, Roy Campanella, Satchel Paige would have missed his window. Branch Rickey is why people read biographies. To see what it was, out of the entire population of the world, to allow for one person to step out of the crowd and say, I'm going to do things differently, and I don't give a crap who likes it. And it's one thing to be that person with that mindset. It's another to actually have the power and capital to pull it off. And when you think back through history, it's hard to find cases of one person creating that pivot point for history to change in a good way. This is one of those moments. The more you dive into Branch Rickey, the less heroic, the more complicated he becomes. The more it looks like he plucked Jackie Robinson out of the pack to saddle him with this soul-crushing burden, to use him as a sacrifice. And I hesitate to use the word biblical here, but it kind of was. Still, for Branch Rickey, this decision to integrate baseball was not safe. It was not popular. In fact, it was nearly career suicide. Remember, Commissioner Kennesaw Mountain Landis, with all his genteel, grandfatherly manner, had spent 2 decades enforcing a racial embargo on the game without ever writing it down. When he died in 1944, the ban ended on paper. But a piece of paper doesn't change hearts. When Rickey met with all the major league owners and let them know he was going to bring up a black ball player, they didn't like it. They hated it. In fact, they voted against it 15-1. 15-1. Thankfully, Rickey didn't need their permission. But the vote told you exactly where the power structure of baseball stood. And when we look at the context, this vote is pretty sad because since 1941, and really earlier, black soldiers had been fighting with American white soldiers. And through World War II, they were fighting and dying with white soldiers. They'd fought. And World War II was a war fought for equality, for the ending of subjugation of one people by another. But this was the owners. How did major league players feel about ending integration? Well, most of them were against it too. Not all, but many felt threatened. They understood, consciously or not, that every black player brought into the majors meant one white player wouldn't make it. But in spite of a 15-1 vote against integration, Branch Rickey held his ground. And he was able to hold his ground because of the credit he'd built up over the years. If it were any other GM, I don't know if he could have done it. But Branch Rickey was unlike any other GM who ever filled the role. So, who was this guy? I really like how Rickey biographer Andy McHugh put it. He said Branch Rickey was a subpar major league player, a pretty abysmal manager, but when Rickey moved to the role of general manager, he found his calling. What a great example of trying new things, failing, and trying again. Rickey failed as a player. He got his law degree and failed as a lawyer. He became a scout and then manager of the Cardinals, which he wasn't great at. But then, for some reason, they gave him a chance to run the Cardinals as GM, general manager, and he took off. For one thing, Rickey was extremely observant. There's a story from Andy McHugh about how observant Rickey was, and it has to do with Rickey sitting behind the plate and watching just one foul ball. And he was sitting next to his aide, who he said, "Write this down." Quote, "The center fielder had failed to get a jump on the ball. The pitcher had an unbalanced motion and would not be able to field his position. And the catcher had blinked as the batter swung, causing him to miss the foul tip." End quote. Rickey saw all of this during one foul ball. But Rickey was also a fantastic big picture thinker. He invented sand pits for his players to practice proper slides. He put strings across the strike zone to help his pitchers perfect their control. And here's a really cool factoid. Branch Rickey invented the farm system. That's right. I always thought the farm system was just there, or that it had developed organically. But that's not true. As the Cardinals GM in the 1920s, Rickey watched other teams scoop up the best minor league players who could outbid poorer teams. So he created a network of teams that would funnel players first to his club. Any player who signed with the Cardinals at any level of that farm system would belong to the Cardinals until the Cardinals decided to trade them. And Rickey proved the effectiveness of a well-organized farm system. His Cardinals machine won 9 pennants and 6 World Series between 1926 and 1946. That's incredible. But that's only part of the story. As a person, Rickey was complicated. According to New York Times writer John Drebinger, Branch Rickey was, quote, "a man of strange complexities, not to mention downright contradictions," end quote. Rickey was brilliant and also absent-minded. He was seen on multiple occasions tossing lit matches into trash cans full of paper. He was generous, creating charities for children, and yet he was known to be so cheap, he got the nickname El Cheapo. He was religious, often quoting Bible verses, and yet he'd openly make anti-Catholic jokes. Now, if you're a detective trying to answer the mystery, why did Rickey push for integration? Do you feel like you have enough information? To me, the clues are there. Rickey loved to innovate. He loved to think up ways to give his team an advantage. And here was a no-brainer advantage: integration. This entire pool of fantastically talented players that no one else was even looking at simply because of the color of their skin. Rickey wanted to win, and he wanted to make money. And with one or more superstar African-American ballplayers, he thought he could do both. Because not only does winning bring in the fans, but bringing in African-American players brings in African-American fans who'd normally be attending Negro League games. And a visionary like Branch Rickey would have been aware of another major influence: television. So, for someone who didn't care about tradition or convention when it came to giving his team the edge, bringing the first black ball player to the majors made perfect sense for Branch Rickey. But this wasn't the whole story. In the biopic 42, Branch Rickey, played by Harrison Ford, is confronted by Jackie Robinson, who wants to know the real reason why Rickey stuck his neck out for integration. This is what Rickey says.
I love baseball. Given my whole life to it. 40-odd years ago, I was a player coach at Ohio Wesleyan University. We had a Negro catcher, best hitter on the team. So I'm laid low, broken, because of the color of his skin, and I didn't do enough to help. Told myself I did, but I didn't. There was something unfair at the heart of the game I loved, and I ignored it. But a time came when I could no longer do that.
And there's evidence to back this up. In fact, the real life story is even deeper. Ricky would talk about this player from 1903, Charles Thomas, crying on the bench, saying, quote, black skin, if only I could make them white, end quote. Hotels wouldn't let Thomas stay there until Ricky intervened. He tried to help this guy, but he felt like he didn't do enough. And this is at least part of the reason he took a stand. But the last black player to play in the majors was Moses Fleetwood Walker in 1884. It's more than 70 years of tradition and wrong-headedness you're trying to overcome. And this is what Branch Rickey faced when he walked into the Dodgers clubhouse in 1947, when he knew there were multiple players adamantly against the idea of Jackie Robinson joining their team, when he knew it would only take one persuasive racist to blow the whole thing to hell. And then the nightmare scenario occurs. And just a warning, I'm going to use the N-word here because this is what they actually said at the time. During the meeting, Dodgers player Carl Furillo stands up and says, quote, I ain't gonna play with no nigger, end quote. Now here's a real test for Branch Rickey, who's already been told by the owners where he could shove his integration experiment. He's been told by the press. He's been told by supposed friends at high levels of the game. And he could have taken Furillo's response as a sign of the overall sentiment of Major League Baseball. He could have backpedaled, thinking baseball in America were not ready. That's not what happened. What happened was that Branch Rickey stepped forward. He stepped up to Carl Furillo and shouted in his face, quote, you don't want to play with no nigger? Then you can go back to Pennsylvania and pound railroad ties for $15 a week because you'll never set foot on a big league baseball field again. End quote. That's awesome. Even reading that now, I feel emotional. And whatever Branch Rickey's issues, his motivations, he was in it now, and he was a rock. And the thing is, when he stood there and shouted this response, he was alone in a room full of professional baseball players who didn't want what he was selling. And he didn't care. And what did Carl Furillo do? He backed down. As did every Dodger. So this answers the question, why Branch Rickey? But what about the question, why Jackie Robinson? Hey everyone. I wanted to let you know that on my Patreon site, patreon.com/Midnight Library of Baseball, you can find the latest installment of my Mr. Burns' Old School All-Star Team. Next on the docket, Mordecai Three Finger Brown, who might be the best player on the list. Brown's story is both incredible and reminiscent of men from his time. So check it out. Also, if you like the podcast and you feel like I'm doing something different and you want to support my mission to help people slow down and reconnect with themselves and others, leave a review or a rating on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you listen, or donate to the show at midnightlibraryofbaseball.com. Okay, back to the show. Here's a cool fact that many people might not be aware of today, which is many Negro League players were enraged when they found out Jackie Robinson was the player selected by Branch Rickey to make it to the majors. Robinson wasn't the best player. You had Satchel Paige and Josh Gibson, who was known as the Babe Ruth of the Negro Leagues. In fact, one writer thought Gibson not being selected led to his early death from a broken heart. Jackie Robinson was hands down an unbelievable athlete, but it was his temperament and inner strength that for Rickey was critical. Rickey knew it would be tough, that whomever he selected would be a punching bag for the first season, if not his entire career. And his selection could not punch back, could not talk back, could not even give dirty looks, because any kind of response would be seen as wild, out of control, immature, which is ridiculous, but that's how it was. Rickey wanted a black player who could take a public humiliation. Was Jackie Robinson this guy? Well, when you look at Robinson's background, his history, you'd think, no. Because just a year earlier, in 1944, Robinson was in the military, as an officer, mind you. He got onto a bus that was supposed to be integrated, but the driver still told Robinson to move to the back. Robinson said, "I don't think so." And in the course of this dispute, he talked back to a white officer. So Jackie Robinson was court-martialed. This was 11 years before the famous Rosa Parks bus boycott. Now, Robinson ended up beating the court-martial, but he was no wallflower. He risked a court-martial to speak his mind and stand up for what was right. So does he sound like the right choice for Branch Rickey? Well, how about this? Robinson spent most of his life in California, where there was much more equality. He went to an integrated high school where he played 5 sports: football, baseball, basketball, track, and tennis. In junior college, he was named to the school's Order of the Mast and Dagger for his scholastic achievements in public service. Then Robinson went to UCLA, where he again excelled in sports, and joined the most integrated football team in the country. In his senior year, he met his wife, Rachel, who would go on to become a nurse, gain a graduate degree, and teach at the Yale School of Nursing, among other achievements. And this blew my mind. His wife, Rachel, is still alive at 103 years old. But for a black man in America, Jackie Robinson was living as free and equal a life as was possible at the time. Unlike many African Americans from the South who'd never experienced a moment of freedom and equality, Robinson knew what it felt like. By the time he stepped into Branch Rickey's office in 1945, Jackie Robinson had been paid to play semi-professional football in Hawaii and California. He'd worked as the head athletic director for Samuel Houston College in Austin, Texas. He'd been an officer in the U.S. Army. And now, after all of that, he could have succeeded in all these different areas. He steps into the office of Dodgers general manager, Branch Rickey. For several hours, Jackie Robinson sat, dumbstruck, while Branch Rickey called him every racial slur that came to his mind. Rickey was testing him. He wanted to see what Robinson could endure. At a certain point, Robinson shouted, "Are you looking for a Negro who's afraid to fight back?" To which Rickey replied, quote, "I need a player with guts enough not to fight back," end quote. But this goes to my earlier point. It feels like of all of the possible black players Rickey could have selected, Jackie Robinson was someone who'd suffer the most because of what he'd grown up to be. It's perverse in a way when you think of African Americans, what they'd endured for the last few hundred years as slaves in America. The very focus of most slave owners was to break the will of their slaves, to break this default human instinct to fight back, to defend themselves. And now, in 1945, Branch Rickey was telling Jackie Robinson that in order to help the cause of civil rights, in order to gain equality and freedom, Jackie Robinson would have to revert backwards. It was like he was an undercover slave, even though he could choose to leave at any time. But there are plenty of psychological experiments that show when you play the part of someone for long enough, it's really hard to hold on to yourself. And for the next decade, Jackie Robinson would battle to remember who he was, which would have been maddening. But Jackie Robinson was strong. He'd proven it. And this is part of the reason Branch Rickey selected him. Now, another reason, which isn't much talked about, but I think is probably a huge factor, is the fact that Jackie Robinson spoke clearly, thoughtfully, like an educated man. Now, again, this shouldn't have mattered, but of course it did. When Robinson opened his mouth, he forced people to confront their preconceptions and stereotypes, which, however backwards it may sound today, would have helped the fight toward equality. Here's the voice of Jackie Robinson.
We believe that any man who would run a campaign based on bigotry should not be, in my view, the candidate. Any party that would nominate a man to run on this particular platform is jeopardizing the prestige of Americans throughout this world.
We have two opposing forces here. One, understandable reasons why Branch Rickey wanted Jackie Robinson, and two, why it would have been harder for Jackie Robinson compared to other players to endure what he was about to endure. For Robinson, sitting in this office for 2 hours listening to Branch Rickey verbally attack him probably seemed like a lot, but Robinson would soon find out what taking the job really meant. In 2021, Chris Lamb wrote this article for USA Today titled The First Trip to Spring Training, a Jackie Robinson story you might not know from 75 years ago. It was 1946, and Jackie and his wife, Rachel, were flying from California to spring training in Florida. As they were leaving their home, Jackie's mother handed him a shoebox full of fried chicken and hard-boiled eggs. His mother knew what she was doing. She'd lived in Georgia and moved Jackie and his siblings away when they were young. Jackie lived most of his life in California. He was embarrassed because he knew the stereotypes about fried chicken and African Americans. But he accepted the box, and he promised his mother he'd take it with them. So Jackie and Rachel flew all night from California to New Orleans, where they were to transfer to a connecting flight to Florida. But they were denied entry onto the next plane. And I'm sure Robinson told them, "Hey, I'm going to Florida to play for the Brooklyn Dodgers." But they didn't care. So Jackie and Rachel went to get something to eat while they waited for the next plane. Guess what? They were refused entry to the restaurant because it was whites only. This is when Jackie Robinson started to get it. He pulled out the shoebox, and he and Rachel grudgingly consumed the fried chicken and hard-boiled eggs. During the trip, they'd be kicked off one more flight and forced to take a bus, sitting in the back the rest of the way to Florida. When Jackie and Rachel finally reached Daytona, they were met by Wendell Smith and Billy Rowe, two journalists from the Pittsburgh Courier, the leading black newspaper in the country. As these new guides were showing the Robinsons around, Jackie let loose. What he experienced was just day-to-day life for the majority of African Americans in America. But for him, it would have been nearly intolerable. Here was this accomplished, kind, highly intelligent man who was being told, "No, you can't get on this plane. No, you can't sit at the front of this bus." And not only that, for an intelligent, free-thinking man, the reasoning would have seemed ridiculous. Yes, you're going to play for one of the most popular baseball teams in the world, but you can't get on the plane because your skin is darker than mine. When you look at it logically, it makes no sense. And this additional fact that people simply weren't using their brains would have infuriated him. So, to these two black reporters, Jackie Robinson went off. And in response, Smith and Rowe explained to Jackie that yes, this is how it is. This is how it's going to be. but they also reiterated what was at stake. What could happen in American society if Jackie kept it together? They painted in broad strokes, and Robinson went to bed with their voices in his head. One of the journalists, Billy Rowe, later said that when the sun came up the next day, Robinson was a different person, meaning he'd understood the magnitude of his role, his mission, and he decided it was too important to ruin because of his temper. But now he knew, to a degree, what he was in for. But he couldn't have known the role television would play in his ascension to baseball and national fame. That he, Jackie Robinson, a black man formerly banned from the game, would become the first sports television celebrity. Now, the fact is, during his first season, television viewers wouldn't have seen much of Jackie Robinson, or the abuse he faced from fans and players, because the reception is still not great, but watching on television, you're not going to see a lot of the details. You're not going to hear the fans shouting racial slurs. The game wasn't televised where Cardinals player Enos Slaughter ran over Robinson's foot and ankle at first base. It was a play many people thought could have ended Robinson's career. They wouldn't have seen the relentless taunting he faced from Phillies manager Ben Chapman. This taunting was so bad that it backfired on Chapman, that people felt bad for Robinson. But in addition to these verbal assaults, people wouldn't have seen on TV much of Robinson getting beamed by pitchers. He was hit 9 times that first season, and thrown at many more times. But when people did see him on TV over the next few seasons, they would have seen a master on the bases. And if this was Branch Rickey's intention, it was brilliant. Because statistically, again, there were other players in the Negro Leagues better than Robinson. But Robinson took over the game when he got on first. And he took over the television screen. Take, for instance, Josh Gibson, cited as one of the greatest all-time players in the Negro Leagues. A man who likely hit more home runs than Babe Ruth, and hit them farther. If you're watching Gibson on TV, you'd see him at the plate, and you'd kind of see him hit a home run, but you probably wouldn't see much of the ball or where it went. For that, you'd need the play-by-play. But you would be able to see Jackie Robinson on the base paths, dancing around, toying with the pitcher and catcher and fielders. And all Robinson needed to work his magic was a walk, or even an error. If he had a high on-base percentage, he would have been able to disrupt a team's psychology and flow like no one else. And for a 6-year stretch, Robinson's on-base percentage was in the top 10. First and foremost, if you see this guy play, you're going to want to continue to see him play, because he's just too good, too entertaining. And if you're a Dodgers fan, you're going to want to see him play because he's helping your team win. The Brooklyn Dodgers won the pennant in 1941, but before that, 1920 was the last time. But in the 10 years Jackie Robinson played for the Dodgers, they won the pennant 6 times. They went to the World Series 6 times, winning it once. So Robinson is helping the Dodgers get local and national television exposure. And television, in return, is helping people become addicted to Jackie Robinson, just like the radio helped people become addicted to Babe Ruth. But there's even more to this connection. By showing up on TV, especially for the bigger nationally televised series, Robinson would have spawned conversations throughout bars and living rooms across the country. Conversations about race and civil rights and justice and fairness. Conversations that wouldn't have happened for years otherwise. There's a famous moment in baseball history which was popularized in the film 42, where Dodgers shortstop Pee Wee Reese walks up to Robinson on the field in Cincinnati, where the racism amongst the fans was rampant. Reese puts his arm around Robinson, and he keeps it there for several long minutes. This seemingly small gesture would have been enormous, because not only was Reese white, but he was from the South. And Reese was respected. He was a great ball player, but also a really nice guy. And here, Reese was saying, it's not about being a racist or not. It's not about having an opinion or not. It's about being cruel or not. And that day, tens of thousands of Cincinnati fans had to re-examine their cruelty. It's just like today. We can paint things Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative, or we can simply ask the question, what is cruel or not? Can't we all agree where that line should be when it comes to how you treat your fellow human beings? But back to Pee Wee Reese, he set an example. So what happens when guys like Reese set this example over and over on national television? If you're an average American in the 1950s who doesn't really have exposure to segregation depending on where you live, and you see Jackie Robinson and then other players being accepted and embraced by their white teammates, you're going to start to accept it as simply the way it is. And if you're an American who doesn't believe in segregation, but week after week you see white players who you respect and admire accepting black players, something is going to start to shift. Now, of course, you have the diehard racist who won't change and will, in fact, double down. But there would have been millions who shifted or started to shift after watching Jackie Robinson, then Larry Doby, Roy Campanella, Minnie Minoso, Don Newcomb, Willie Mays, and dozens more. Not only this, but you're going to see Jackie Robinson as a pillar of restraint and composure, except on the base paths. Robinson was well-spoken. His wife was a professor. They broke the stereotypes and helped America break its stereotype about African Americans. The message here, and the message Robinson promoted with his play and with his words, was that if you give someone a chance, no matter their skin color or background, they can excel. They can knock your socks off, which is in the best interest of everyone. Now, we've mainly been talking about Jackie Robinson playing baseball on television. But what about his television appearances outside the game? In 1950, Robinson appeared on the show titled Cavalcade of the Stars to promote the film titled The Jackie Robinson Story, about Robinson's life, and starring Robinson, who played himself. In this TV promotion, Robinson talks to a sick child who's given up hope.
Hey, Billy. Every dream I had came true. Yours will, too. You want to play catch now?
No thanks, Mr. Robinson. I got 2 strikes against me.
Billy, I've been playing baseball for a long time, and I know there's a lot of things a kid can do with 2 strikes on him. He can stand in there and let the 3rd strike pass him by, or he can keep his eye on the ball, take a healthy cut at it, and knock it out of the ballpark. Now, what would you do?
Yeah, Bill, what would you do?
I think I know.
Now, this may seem a bit cheesy to our modern ears, but Robinson saying these words to this kid would have been massive at the time. For children across the country of all colors and backgrounds to hear this message that you can be anything you want if you keep trying, if you don't give up. And then simply to see Robinson on television with Hollywood stars. It's hard to oversell how influential that would have been. From writer Zach Petrillo, quote, Babe Ruth may have been baseball's first major star, delivered to the public via national headlines, newsreels, and radio. But Robinson was, in just his 3rd season, the sport's first star to come directly into households via the small screen. End quote. Robinson retired from baseball after only 10 years, and there's a good reason. He was 28 when he won Rookie of the Year. Remember, Branch Rickey needed a man with poise, with maturity and self-control, and that would have been hard to find in a 20-year-old. When Robinson left the game as a player, he went on to become the first African-American broadcaster. Television, in this case, was a blessing and a curse. On the plus side, millions of people got to see what was possible. And Robinson had charisma, he had poise. And it's one thing to be a black athlete, but it's another thing entirely to sit next to broadcasters and analyze a game. Again, that's not how it should have been, but it's how it was. And this was breaking more stereotypes. This was allowing men and women and children across the country to see what was possible. Jackie Robinson, black or white, had all the skills necessary to be a great broadcaster. Except, maybe, his voice. According to author Eldon Ham, Robinson's voice was too high-pitched, which didn't make for great broadcasting. And ultimately, Robinson wouldn't last. But is this true? Just listen to a clip of Robinson on The Ed Sullivan Show.
We got your model here, your model bat, Jackie, and I'm going to ask a couple of questions for the kids. That is
my model. This is,
isn't it?
Willie Mays on here, Ed.
Jackie, that's show business.
Well, it's quite a
But Jackie, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions for the youngsters home. What would you say would be the first thing that these little fellas from 8 to 12 should remember?
Well, the first thing I would say, Ed, is that they should not imitate a Willie Mays, for instance, while he's at bat. They must get their own style. Get in the batter's box, be comfortable, because, as you know, the real good hitters all are individual players. They have individual styles. So for a little leaguer to try to imitate one of the big league ball players, they'll get into some awfully bad habits.
That's very, very good.
Right.
Now, pardon me, Jack.
Yeah, go ahead.
What position should the bat be?
Yeah, Robinson's voice is a bit high, but it's just as high as Ed Sullivan, who was the most popular talk show host of the day. More likely, it was Robinson's busy activist career and his wish to speak out about social issues in a world where broadcasters didn't step outside the box of baseball. I mean, they still really don't step outside that box. But Jackie Robinson wanted to talk about issues, and he probably didn't get a good reception for that. But through baseball and television, Jackie Robinson did help to change the country. In 1954, in the famous court case Brown versus Board of Education, the Supreme Court ruled that segregation in public schools was unconstitutional. Chief Justice Earl Warren pointed out, quote, "Today, many Negroes have achieved outstanding success in the arts and sciences, as well as in the business and professional world." End quote. But author Eldon Ham believed Warren was talking about baseball. From Ham, quote, "The decision did not specifically mention baseball, probably because it was making a case for education and not sports. But the court had to have meant baseball, at least in part. By 1954, nowhere was the success of the black man more viably demonstrated than on the baseball diamond." End quote. And tying this to television, Ham went on to say, quote, "Television provided the means for the visible, tangible evidence that African American ball players, and therefore by subtle extension African American citizens, could be equal to their white counterparts." End quote. As Robinson progressed, so did television technology, and the advancements would have made it even harder for him, because Robinson learned to put on a professional, serious face all the time. Because unlike most spectators in the stands, television viewers could see his expressions. Every year, images would have become sharper, clearer, more close-ups, meaning expressions of anger, disgust would have been picked up, and could have, as Branch Rickey said, ruined the great experiment. So composure would have been the default, to push down or ignore his emotions during the game. And it's not only the stress of people watching all over the country, but it's the stress of knowing that when you step to the plate, there's a good chance the pitcher's going to throw at your head. Robinson was beaned 9 times in 1947, and according to StatMuse, he was hit by a pitch 72 times in his career. Now, this doesn't mean he was hit in the head all those times, but according to Missy Sullivan, writing an article for History.com, in 1947, Robinson had metal plates sewn into his baseball cap because of the specific added threat to him of getting hit in the head. Remember, players had no helmets at this time. So in terms of health, Robinson was literally assaulted by a pitcher 72 times. But he would have had the continual stress of knowing he'd be targeted. He would have had the stress of enduring terrible slurs and insults by fans and players like Ben Chapman, like his own teammates, day in and day out. He would have endured the unimaginable stress of hate mail, of death threats, not only threats upon his life, but the lives of his wife and children. And television, while great in so many ways, would have also exposed Robinson to more of the haters. Now, when it comes to Jackie Robinson and television, there's one more misconception I want to discuss: his playing abilities. I said earlier that when Robinson was chosen by Branch Rickey to come up to the majors, there were other, better Negro League players, which on paper was true at the time. And when people talk about Robinson being a great ball player, they are often talking about his social impact in addition to his athletic performance. When you just look at his athletic performance, judged by modern statistical analysis, he was actually one of the all-time greats. Robinson's career WAR, or wins above replacement, which today is one of the best indicators of a player's overall offensive and defensive contributions, ranks him 104th all-time among position players. That's incredible, because WAR is cumulative. The more years you play, the higher it goes. And Robinson only played 11 seasons, and really only 7 full seasons, when just about all the guys in front of him on that list have 18, 19, 20 plus seasons. According to writer Neil Payne in an article for 538, Robinson's run from 1948 to 1953 was, quote, as good as anybody's ever been, literally, end quote. In the history of Major League Baseball, only 4 players had higher WAR stats between the ages of 29 and 34. Willie Mays, Babe Ruth, Honus Wagner, and Lou Gehrig. Now, some people might argue that the tension and day-to-day hardships could have helped Robinson focus, could have helped him play harder, better. But studies show this is probably not true. One study I found showed that under pressure, players' motor control gets tight and variable, meaning they can't repeat their swings, so their batting average goes down. Another study published in the International Journal of Sports Medicine showed that anxiety reduces the brain's ability to anticipate ball flight, meaning batters are going to be fooled more often and miss. A third study linked high anxiety to overthinking and distraction. Now, the study showed that some arousal could be good, but when the stress becomes chronic, the benefits slip away. And for Jackie Robinson, his anxiety was chronic because he was chronically suppressing his feelings. And that begs the question, how good could he have been if he was not under the microscope of television, of expectations, of being the only hope? How good could he have been if he was accepted, if he hadn't received so much ridicule, so much harassment, so many death threats? And outside of his athletic performance, how long might he have lived? Jackie Robinson didn't just integrate baseball. He integrated the American living room. Before most families had ever shared a school, a neighborhood, or a meal with a Black American, they shared the experience of watching Jackie steal home. They shared the sight of a Black man carrying himself with dignity in the face of cruelty. Television didn't just broadcast his talent. It broadcast his restraint, his intelligence, and his humanity. And that changed people, sometimes slowly, sometimes all at once. But visibility comes with a price. Robinson absorbed a level of stress that modern sports science now tells us tears at the body from the inside. He played his entire career under that weight. And still, in just a decade, he achieved what other greats needed 20 years to build. So when we ask how great he might have been without that burden, without the television microscope, maybe the deeper question is how much better off we are as a country because he carried that weight, because he lived his truth on a screen that forced the country to look, because he made America see, and seeing is the first step toward changing anything at all. We'll end tonight with a listener baseball story. Here's Dave from Connecticut.
My dad was a Yankee fan. Therefore, it was in my DNA. There's no way I was not going to be a Yankee fan. We had a small black and white TV, and my dad found that if we had it at a certain location in the house at certain times of the night, you could get a snowy Channel 11 with a little, what they call a little booster on the back of the TV. I don't know what that meant, but you could sort of flip the switch and it would kind of boost the antenna a little bit. And so my dad would sit there, watching this snowy, grainy, black and white, listening to Mel Allen, because my dad was a huge Mel Allen fan. And so, I grew up with Mel Allen and Red Barber and, Scooter Rizzuto. But the radio was huge. I loved the New York Yankees. And, it was something as I said, in my DNA. I mean, it was so bad that when I was a little kid, I went to grammar school. They didn't call them elementary schools. I went to grammar school, and I knew that Mr. Cooney, the janitor, listened to the World Series. And I used to ask to go to the bathroom during Yankee World Series games. And my dad knew Mr. Cooney because he used to drink at the same bar, and I would get on my way to the bathroom. I go, Mr. Cooney, what's the score? What's the score? And then go back to my classroom. But that morning in 1962, my dad brought me into his bedroom. He sat me on the bed. I was just sitting there, and he takes 2 World Series tickets out of his top drawer and just looks at me and he goes, "Do you want to go today?" And I just started bawling. I just started crying. I didn't believe it. I was overwhelmed. It was an 80-mile drive from Waterbury, Connecticut to Yankee Stadium. My mom packed a lunch. Of course, we, wouldn't buy food at the stadium. My dad was a butcher working 7 days a week. So this was a big deal. And he packed the lunch, and we drove down the Merritt Parkway, and it was raining. I remember it raining, but I never in my mind thought that the game was not going to be played that day. And we always parked in Woodlawn, which was at the end of the elevated train in the Bronx. And we would pull in the gas station, and the gas station attendant would always say, New Jersey or Connecticut. And then he would point your car so that when the game was over, you'd be going the right direction. And then we would go in. My dad would have a drink at the bar at the bottom of at the L. We'd get on the elevated train and rode through the Bronx. And what I remember so clearly is just the crowds and holding onto his hand, like just that feeling of a little boy, a little 8-year-old boy grabbing his dad's hand and holding on. And then we get to the stadium, and our seats were in section 27 in the top row. So the old Yankee Stadium was very, very steep. And we sat in section 27 in the top row, And I remember the woman next to us was like really nervous. She was like, it's scary up here. And I was like so happy. And we waited and the game was delayed. And then the announcement came, today's game has been postponed. And my dad never hesitated. And my dad just said, we're coming back tomorrow, David. We're coming back tomorrow. And for him to take 2 days off from work as a butcher, it's a huge deal. And it just showed his love for me and wanting to have this experience together. And the next day, it was bright sunshine. We got to Yankee Stadium, back to the seats in the top row of section 27. And then late in the game, Tom Tresh hits the 3-run homer and the Yankees win. And I just remember that love of my dad, the warmth of him hugging me, the celebration of our team winning, and then just going home smiling. So in 1958, I'm 4 years old. That's my earliest memory. And my dad's watching the World Series. And I know that, I know, what this means to him. And I don't think at the time I ever knew that the Yankees had lost to the Milwaukee Braves in 57. But I knew when the Yankees were down 3-1 in the 58 World Series what it meant to him. And I went into my coin collection. What 4-year-old has a coin collection? I don't know. But I gave him a silver dollar for good luck. The Yankees win the next 3 games. My dad kept that silver dollar from 1958 until he died in 1987 in his pocket every day. And when he died, it was almost completely worn away, just from the rattle of change in his pocket. When he died, I wrote a letter to my son, which he has never seen. He doesn't even know it exists. I wrote a letter to my son. I put the coin in the envelope and I put it away. And I said, you don't open this until after I die. And it's my dad's silver dollar.
Thanks, Dave, for this incredible story. Dave has a couple more amazing stories to share. If you want to hear them, you can find them on patreon.com/Midnight Library of Baseball. In episode 10, we'll look at a baseball tradition that has become an American institution. But its origins are a television show from 1959, built on a shoestring budget that introduced the country to the best ball players of the day, and later helped a little girl find her true love. Next time on the Midnight Library of Baseball. The show is produced and edited by me, Ben Orlando. Music by Sergi Patkin and Ashot Danielian, and other artists at Pixabay and Artlist.io. Good night.